In the quiet corners of suburbia, where life often feels predictable, today was supposed to be just like any other. The sun was rising, casting a golden glow on the streets where children should have been getting ready for school, where families were settling into their routines. But in the midst of this tranquility, an unthinkable series of events was about to unfold, triggered by a simple but fateful decision. It was a typical father-son disagreement. One of those moments we all know too well, where the words said in anger can sometimes feel sharper than any weapon. But in this case, one father's momentary lapse in judgment would set a chain of events in motion that no one could have predicted. A decision made in haste, under pressure, that would change everything. Frustrated, overwhelmed by the pressures of the day, the father does something that will haunt him for the rest of his life. In a split second, he sends his son outside, telling him to wait on the street. And just like that, the child, vulnerable, confused, finds himself standing alone on the sidewalk. His father's back turned, his anger still simmering, unaware of the impending danger that lurks just out of sight. He thought he was in control, but what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that out in the shadows, hidden in plain sight, a much greater threat was moving closer, drawn by the faintest sounds of life, a threat that no one could have predicted. This is where the story begins, a moment of anger, a decision that seemed small at the time, but would soon lead to something far bigger, something far more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. The argument between the father and his son intensifies as the moments tick by. The father's face is tight with frustration, his eyes burning with the heat of a conflict that seems to have no resolution. The boy, standing there with his arms crossed, tries to explain himself, his voice cracking under the weight of his emotions. He wants to be heard, but his father's anger drowns out his words, each attempt to speak only making things worse. The father shakes his head, clearly overwhelmed, as the tension between them rises. The boy's pleas fall on deaf ears, his face a mix of confusion and hurt. In a desperate attempt to regain control of the situation, the father's patience snaps. His tone sharpens, the words coming out as a demand, not a suggestion. "Get outside, now," he orders, pointing toward the door. The child hesitates for a moment, eyes wide with disbelief, not understanding what just happened. But the father's voice leaves no room for argument. The boy, heart sinking, takes a step back and reluctantly walks toward the door, the weight of the moment settling heavily on his small shoulders. The door slams behind him, and the father stands there, watching as his son walks down the driveway. His anger still lingers, but the father is already turning away, too consumed by the pressures of the day to notice how his son is feeling. The boy stands on the sidewalk, hands tucked in his pockets, staring at the ground. The hurt is visible on his face, but the silence between them says it all. There are no words left to be said. The father, meanwhile, steps back into the house, unaware of the consequences of his actions. He shuts the door with a soft click, the sound barely noticeable against the tension that now fills the air. But as the boy stands outside, feeling smaller with each passing second, he has no idea that the world around him is about to change forever. What started as a simple argument, something every family goes through, is now spiraling toward something far more dangerous. The father's anger, the boy's loneliness, and the quiet hum of the morning breeze are all about to intersect in a way no one could have imagined. As the boy stands on the sidewalk, the peaceful neighborhood continues unaware of the looming danger. His small figure, now a lonely silhouette against the quiet street, seems to shrink under the weight of the situation. The sunlight that had once seemed comforting now feels distant, as if the world around him has changed, leaving him feeling more isolated than ever. His eyes dart around, searching for something familiar, something to ease the discomfort settling in his chest. But everything feels foreign. His father's harsh words still echo in his ears, and the silence between them now feels colder than it ever has before. What the boy doesn't know, what he can't see, is that something else is silently closing in. Something much bigger than his father's anger. Just beyond the tree line at the edge of the neighborhood, in the deepening shadows of the woods, a massive creature is moving. Its steps are slow and measured, each one a reminder of the predator lurking within the peaceful surroundings. The bear, drawn by the faintest sounds of movement, pads through the brush with a quiet determination. The soft rustle of leaves underfoot is the only indication of its presence, the creature's instincts guiding it closer to the unsuspecting child. The bear's senses are heightened, its eyes scanning the path ahead as it moves further toward the street. The scent of the boy, still lingering in the air, has caught its attention. The rustling of the child's shifting posture on the sidewalk, the slightest of sounds, has stirred something primal within the animal. The bear's pace quickens, each step bringing it closer to the vulnerable child standing alone. The boy, lost in his thoughts, remains unaware of the danger approaching. His mind is elsewhere, grappling with the sting of his father's decision to send him outside. But there is something about the stillness of the air, something about the shift in the atmosphere that he can't quite place. It's subtle, like a feeling deep in his gut, a sense that something is amiss, but he brushes it off, trying to ignore the nagging sensation in the back of his mind, believing it's just his imagination. Meanwhile, the bear is drawing closer, its massive frame blending into the shadows as it approaches the edge of the neighborhood. The tension between the boy and the creature grows, the moment of collision inevitable. Neither of them knows yet, but their worlds are about to collide in a way that will change everything. The boy continues to stand on the sidewalk, the minutes stretching into what feels like hours. His mind races as he tries to make sense of what's happening. The argument with his father keeps playing over and over in his head, each word more hurtful than the last. He wonders why his father was so angry, why he had to be sent outside like this. The feelings of abandonment and confusion build up inside him, and he can't shake the heavy weight pressing down on his chest. But as much as he tries to focus on something else, something in the air feels off. A strange sense of unease washes over him, but he doesn't know where it's coming from. In the distance, the bear's presence grows more pronounced. The animal, now only a few yards away from the edge of the street, is fixated on the boy. Its senses are sharp, tracking every movement, every sound. The animal's heavy paws move almost silently across the ground, the only sign of its approach being the faintest rustle in the leaves. The bear's massive form is nearly hidden by the trees, but it's close now, close enough that it can see the boy's small frame, standing alone and vulnerable in the middle of the street. The boy's gaze shifts slightly, his eyes scanning the surroundings. The unsettling feeling in his stomach intensifies, and he can't help but turn his head, his instincts suddenly alert. For the first time, he feels as though something isn't right. He freezes. The hairs on the back of his neck stand up as the faintest noise breaks the silence, a low, distant growl, almost imperceptible, but undeniable. His heart skips a beat. He doesn't know what it is, but he knows it's not something he should ignore. His eyes scan the trees, but he sees nothing. The feeling of being watched grips him now, and he takes an uncertain step backward. The bear is now close enough that the boy can hear its movements more clearly. A slight rustling of leaves, the soft thud of its steps. His pulse quickens, his breath shallow. For a moment, the world seems to stand still. The boy's mind races, but there's no time for thought, only instinct. He takes another step backward, but it's too late. The bear has already caught its first glimpse of him, its dark eyes locking onto the child's form. Frozen in place, the boy stares at the creature. His mind struggles to comprehend what he's seeing. The size, the power of it, makes everything feel surreal. His body, paralyzed by fear, doesn't know what to do. All he can hear now is his own heartbeat, thudding in his chest like a drum. The bear, too, seems to pause, sizing up the situation. For a brief moment, the two are caught in a silent standoff, neither moving. But the stillness is shattered. A crackling sound, a branch snapping underfoot, breaks the silence, causing both the boy and the bear to react. The boy stumbles backward, his body instinctively wanting to flee, but he's already too late. The bear, sensing the boy's movement, starts to step forward, its heavy, deliberate strides bringing it closer with each passing second. The boy's panic sets in, his legs trembling as he stands frozen, unable to move. The boy's heart races as the bear takes its first step toward him. Every muscle in his body screams for him to run, but fear has paralyzed him. His legs feel like they're made of stone, his feet rooted to the ground. The bear's eyes are locked onto him, its massive form moving with a terrifying grace. He can hear the deep, guttural breaths it takes, the sound of its paw steps crunching on the ground. He's frozen in terror, unable to think, unable to move. The world around him seems to narrow into a single, horrifying focus. The bear. It's so close now, too close. His instincts scream at him to do something, anything, but he can't find the strength. The air feels thick with tension, the space between the boy and the predator shrinking with every second. The boy's eyes widen, his breath shallow as he watches the bear's enormous paw lift and fall with a soft thud, each step bringing the creature closer to him. Time seems to stretch, the seconds ticking by like hours. Then, the boy's body reacts before his mind can catch up. The bear's growl grows louder, more menacing, and the sound shakes him out of his stupor. He takes a small step back, then another, his feet finally moving. Panic floods his senses as he starts to turn, looking frantically for a way to escape, but there's nowhere to go. The street is open, wide, and the bear's massive size is all-consuming. Suddenly, a voice shouts from behind. The father. "Get inside! Now!" The father's shout pierces through the air, filled with urgency. The boy turns, his heart pounding in his chest, his body still trembling from fear. The father's face appears in the doorway, wide-eyed, panic setting in as he sees the bear. His breath catches as the reality of the situation crashes into him. His son is in danger, and he's too far away to do anything but yell. The boy doesn't hesitate. Instinct kicks in, and he bolts toward the safety of the house, his feet pounding the pavement. But the bear is faster. With a sudden burst of energy, the creature charges forward, its massive body moving with surprising speed. The boy feels the ground tremble as the bear closes in, but he pushes himself harder, his legs burning as he runs toward the house. The father, still frozen in shock, doesn't know what to do. His son is so close to the door, but the bear is right behind him. He reaches out, desperate, as if his arms can somehow bridge the gap between them. The boy is almost there, just a few more steps. But then, with a violent swipe, the bear lunges, its claws flashing in the sunlight. The sound of its roar fills the air, a deafening, primal noise that shakes the very ground beneath them. The boy stumbles, nearly falling, but he manages to stay upright, his fear pushing him forward. He's so close now, so close to safety, but the bear is still charging, closing the distance between them. In that split second, just as the bear's claws swipe through the air, something incredible happens. The father, driven by sheer panic, moves without thinking. He throws open the door, stepping outside in a rush, his mind flooded with terror and desperation. His only thought is to get to his son, to protect him, even if it means risking everything. The boy is almost at the door, but with each passing moment, the distance between safety and disaster seems to grow. The bear is inches away, its heavy paws pounding the ground as it charges forward with brutal force. In the chaos, the father makes a decision. Without hesitation, he rushes toward the boy, calling his name, his voice hoarse with panic. "Run! Run!" he yells, his eyes locked on the bear closing in. The boy, hearing his father's voice, gathers whatever strength he has left and makes a final, frantic sprint toward the door. His heart is pounding in his chest, his legs burning with the effort, but the sound of the bear's growl still fills the air, a constant reminder of the danger chasing him. Just as the boy reaches the threshold of the house, his father's arms stretch out to pull him inside. The bear's massive form is only a few feet away now, its jaws snapping, but it's too late. The father pulls his son through the door, slamming it shut just as the bear's claws rake across the wood. The door shudders under the impact, but it holds, sealing them inside. For a moment, there's nothing but the sound of ragged breaths and the pounding of their hearts. The father collapses against the door, breathless, his mind struggling to process what just happened. His son, still shaking, presses his face into his father's chest, too scared to say anything, his body trembling with the aftershock of the terror they just faced. The two of them stand there in silence, the weight of the moment sinking in. It's over, for now. They are safe. But the realization hits both of them at the same time. The world outside has changed. The father's reckless decision, his anger earlier that day, had nearly cost him everything. And the boy, left alone outside, had come closer to a fate neither of them could have imagined. As they hold each other, the father's mind races with regret, guilt flooding in. He looks down at his son, who looks up at him with wide, still frightened eyes. The events that just unfolded are etched in both of their memories forever, a stark reminder of the dangers lurking in the world, just beyond the safety of their home. And though they are safe now, neither of them will ever forget how close they came to losing it all. As the father and son stand in the dimly lit hallway, still catching their breath, the air in the house feels thick with the weight of what just happened. The pounding of the boy's heart starts to slow, but the terror he felt lingers in his eyes. His grip on his father tightens, as if holding on to him is the only thing keeping him grounded. The father, equally shaken, holds his son close, his mind spinning. The reality of the situation is settling in now, and the regret is overwhelming. His son had been outside, vulnerable and alone, in the very moment the danger was closing in on them both. I'm so sorry, the father finally whispers, his voice breaking as the words leave his lips. His gaze falls to the floor, unable to meet his son's eyes. The guilt of his actions presses down on him like a heavy weight. He had let his anger get the best of him, and it almost cost him his son. The anger that had fueled him earlier, the frustration over something so small, seems utterly insignificant now. The boy, his face still pale, looks up at him, his eyes wide with uncertainty. It's clear that the child doesn't fully understand what happened, not yet. The boy's world had been turned upside down, but he had survived. The silence between them is heavy, filled with emotions neither of them knows how to express. After a long pause, the father finally pulls his son away just slightly, looking him in the eyes. "You're safe now," he says softly, though his voice wavers. His son nods slowly, still processing the events. His lips part, as if to say something, but he can't find the words. The confusion and fear are still too fresh, too raw. Outside, the bear, now far from the house, retreats into the shadows of the woods, disappearing from view. The danger has passed, but the emotional scars from the ordeal will take longer to heal. The father's mind drifts back to the bear, to the primal terror it brought, but also to the stark reality of the decisions he made. He knows that what happened today will stay with him forever. His anger, the rash choices, the moment when he pushed his son outside into harm's way. His son had been left alone, vulnerable, with no idea that danger was lurking just around the corner, and the father hadn't been there to protect him. "We're okay," the father repeats, this time more to himself than to his son. "We're okay." But even as he says the words, a part of him knows they'll never be the same. This day, this experience, has changed them both. It will always be there, in the back of their minds, reminding them of how quickly life can turn, how fragile safety really is. For the boy, the terror of the bear seems to fade slowly, but what remains is a deep sense of uncertainty. He doesn't understand why his father sent him outside in the first place, why the anger took control. But there's something else too, an understanding that, no matter what happened earlier, his father had been there when it counted most. In the end, his father had protected him, and that's what mattered. As they stand together in the hallway, the door still firmly closed, they both know that this experience will forever shape their relationship. The bond between them has been tested in ways neither of them could have anticipated, but now, more than ever, it's clear that nothing is more important than the love and protection they have for each other. The hours pass, and the house is quiet again, but the air still feels heavy, as if the weight of the events is lingering in every corner. The father and son sit together in the living room, each lost in their thoughts, the silence between them thick and almost suffocating. The father keeps glancing over at his son, as if waiting for some sign that everything will be okay, that they can go back to how things were before. But nothing feels normal anymore. The boy is curled up on the couch, his eyes distant, replaying the terrifying moments outside in his mind. Every sound, every movement, every growl of the bear seems to haunt him, making him jump at the slightest noise. The father shifts uncomfortably, the guilt still gnawing at him. He wants to apologize again, to explain, to somehow make things right. But he knows words alone can't undo what happened. He had been angry, selfish, and thoughtless, and in doing so, had put his son in harm's way. The weight of that realization is almost too much to bear. His son is sitting right there, so close, but emotionally there's a distance between them that's hard to bridge. He tries to find the right words, but they feel inadequate. I never should have made you go outside, he says, his voice shaky. I wasn't thinking. I'm so sorry. The boy finally looks up at him, and for a moment, their eyes meet. There's something in the child's gaze, hesitant, confused, but not as afraid as before. He doesn't say anything, but his expression softens. The father's heart aches, seeing the mix of fear and vulnerability still etched on his son's face. I didn't mean for it to get so bad, the father continues, his voice breaking. I was just frustrated, and I never should have let it get to that point. The boy doesn't respond, but he doesn't look away either. He's still processing the fear, the confusion, the terror of what happened. But there's something else there too, a quiet understanding. Maybe he doesn't completely forgive his father just yet, but the boy can see the pain in his father's eyes, and for the first time, he realizes that his father is human too. He makes mistakes. He's not perfect. And maybe that's all he needs to know right now. It's enough. The father sighs, his shoulders slumping with exhaustion, both physical and emotional. He leans back in his chair, staring at the wall, thinking of the bear, of how close they both came to disaster. He knows that what happened today will change them forever. They've both learned something, though neither can yet fully articulate what it is. The boy had to face a fear so primal, something beyond his control, and the father had been forced to confront the consequences of his own actions, how one moment of anger could have torn their lives apart. I want you to know that I love you, the father says quietly, his voice full of sincerity. And no matter what happens, I'll always protect you. I won't ever make that mistake again. The boy nods, but doesn't say anything. They don't need to say much. The understanding between them is unspoken, but clear. The bond between father and son has been tested, but it has also been strengthened in ways neither of them expected. They both know that life is fragile, that things can change in an instant. But for now, they're together, and that's all that matters. As the evening sets in, the house feels quieter, more peaceful. The father and son share a quiet moment, sitting side by side. They don't need to speak anymore. The weight of the day hangs in the air, but they've survived it. Together. The storm has passed, and now, for the first time since the terrifying events unfolded, they begin to realize that, in the end, love is what will carry them forward. And no matter how much time passes, or how many obstacles they face, that bond between them will never break. The next day, the sun rises as usual, casting its warm light across the neighborhood, but for the father and son, everything feels different. The familiar, comforting routine they once took for granted now seems altered by the events of the previous day. The weight of what happened still lingers, but there's a subtle shift in the way they move through the day. The house is quieter, more subdued, as if the memories of the bear's terrifying presence have left a mark on everything around them. The father is in the kitchen, making breakfast, his movements slower than usual. He glances out the window occasionally, as if expecting to see something, anything that might remind him of the danger they faced. But the world outside is peaceful, the street empty and calm. The bear is long gone, retreating into the woods, and the normal rhythms of life are resuming. Yet, for the father, nothing feels quite as it did before. He knows that he can't just go back to pretending everything is fine. The reality of what happened is too fresh, too raw. The boy, still shaken but calmer than the day before, sits at the kitchen table. His eyes are on his cereal, but his thoughts are far away, still haunted by the memories of the bear's roar, the thudding of its footsteps. He's trying to push the fear out of his mind, to return to his normal life, but something has shifted in him. He knows that the world isn't as safe as he once thought. The terror of facing that bear, of being left alone and vulnerable, has changed him. He can't unsee it. And though the house feels like a sanctuary now, part of him wonders when the next danger will come, what could threaten his safety again. The father places a plate of food in front of his son and sits across from him, their eyes meeting for a moment. There's an unspoken understanding between them now. The father knows the boy is still processing what happened, still feeling the weight of the experience. "Are you okay?" the father asks softly, his voice filled with concern. The boy nods slowly, his gaze still distant. "Yeah," he murmurs, but there's a quiet uncertainty in his voice. He doesn't fully understand what's going on in his head, what he's feeling, but he knows that he's not the same anymore. "I'm just glad it's over." The father smiles weakly, the guilt in his chest still lingering, even though he's trying his best to push it away. He's trying to make things right, trying to show his son that he's there for him, that he's learned from his mistakes. But the weight of those mistakes, the regret over sending his son outside in the first place, still weighs heavily on him. He reaches out, placing a hand gently on his son's arm, offering silent comfort. The boy looks up at him, his eyes meeting his father's, and for a brief moment, there's a flicker of understanding between them. It's not a perfect reconciliation, not a full erasure of the fear or the guilt, but it's a step forward. In the silence, they both know that they've faced something terrible together, and though they can't fully explain the depth of the experience, they understand each other in ways they didn't before. As the father and son sit together in the quiet morning, the world outside continues on, as it always does. But for them, everything has changed. The bond between them has been tested in ways that neither could have predicted. The fear, the guilt, the overwhelming emotion of surviving such a close call have left a mark on them, but they've also come out the other side stronger. In the end, the lesson they both take away is simple: the importance of being there for each other, no matter what. Because life is unpredictable, and sometimes it takes facing the unimaginable to realize just how precious every moment truly is. Days have passed since the terrifying encounter with the bear, but the experience still weighs heavily on the father and son. Their lives have slowly started to return to a semblance of normalcy, yet the shadow of what happened lingers. It's hard to forget the raw fear of that moment, the terrifying realization that one decision, one misstep, could have changed everything. But life moves on, and so must they. The father continues to carry the weight of his actions, though he tries not to show it. He's more patient now, more aware of the fragility of life, of how easily things can spiral out of control. He's been more present for his son, making an effort to listen, to understand. It's clear that the events of the past few days have changed him, opened his eyes in ways he hadn't expected. The anger that once seemed so consuming now feels distant, a memory of a man he no longer recognizes. The boy, on the other hand, is learning to cope with the lingering fear that still bubbles beneath the surface. He's more cautious now, more aware of his surroundings, even in the safety of his own home. The world no longer feels as certain as it once did, and every rustle of wind, every creak of the house feels like a reminder of the danger that could be lurking just out of sight. He's still processing everything that happened, but there's a quiet resilience in him now. He's learned what it feels like to be vulnerable, and in some strange way, it's made him stronger. Though the fear isn't gone, it's no longer paralyzing. He knows that he survived something that many wouldn't, and that realization gives him a newfound courage. They spend their days quietly, side by side. The father works in the garage, fixing things around the house, his mind constantly wandering back to that day, wondering how different things could have been. But he doesn't dwell on it anymore. He has to move forward. And in a way, he's thankful. Thankful that his son is still here, that they both came out of that experience alive, that they still have time to make things right. The boy has started to return to his routine, though the echoes of the past still remain. He plays outside again, though not as far from the house as he used to. He's cautious now, more aware of his surroundings. The innocence of childhood, once so free and unburdened, has been replaced with a quiet wariness. He looks to the trees with a new sense of caution. But there's something else, too. A sense of appreciation for the safety of his home, for the presence of his father, for the small moments that before he might have taken for granted. One afternoon, as they sit together in the living room, the boy speaks up. His voice is softer than usual, his words carefully chosen. "Dad," he says, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "I know you didn't mean it. I just don't want something like that to happen again. I don't want to feel scared like that anymore." His voice falters slightly, but there's a sense of maturity in his words. He's learned something that day, something profound. It's not just about survival. It's about understanding, about knowing that even in moments of fear, there's strength to be found. The father turns to his son, his heart swelling with pride and sadness all at once. He reaches out and pulls him into a hug, holding him close, not saying anything at first. Words can't fix what's happened, but in this moment, they don't need to be said. The hug is enough. The understanding is enough. The father looks down at his son, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry for what happened, for everything. But I'll never make that mistake again. You're safe. I'll always make sure of it." The boy nods, a small but genuine smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. For the first time in days, the tension between them seems to ease. The bond they share has been tested in ways they could never have imagined, but it's still strong, still unbreakable. They've both been through something no one could have prepared them for, but they've come out the other side, together. The world outside is still the same. Life continues as it always does. But for the father and son, the lessons they've learned will stay with them forever. The terror of that day will fade, but the understanding, the love, and the commitment to each other will never be forgotten. They've learned the importance of being present, of valuing each moment, and most importantly, of never taking each other for granted. And as they sit there together, the weight of the past lifting ever so slightly, they realize that in the end, they have everything they need. They have each other. And that, more than anything, is enough.